region. This production is for adults only.
Have you seen the Slash?
Made by users for users.
Engineered for flavor.
One of the coolest features around.
A built-in loading tool.
Learn more at www.stonesmiths.ca.
What's happening? We'll tell you right now on This Week in Cannabis News.
Back with my good friend David Wiley of the OZ for our first segment officially of 2021. Of course, we did the top 5 stories of the year on New Year's Day. But David, great to chat with you. How was everything for you over your holiday season?
It was awesome. Good to see you again. I got a mug with a D on it for Christmas.
Nice.
So I'm feeling very fancy right now.
Yeah, or you won't lose it, right? You'll know whose mug that is when you go to grab it. So that's very fancy. I really like that.
I never thought about that benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's great to chat with you again. And, 2020 was a very bizarre year and a tough year for a lot of people, but very bizarre with a lot of things that happened. And man, this first couple of stories in 2021, they're right up there when it comes to kind of bizarreness. So let's start with this first one about a raid, I guess, and it includes cannabis infused potato chips.
It's, I used to cover a lot of crime stories as a hard news journalist. And so many of those stories were about grow up bus where police laid out pounds of pot, paraded perps to provincial court over possession charges. So let's not forget what prohibition was and is still in most of the world. And that said, there are still crime stories, and some of them are actually quite interesting. Here's one. We've got a bust at a home in the Vancouver borough of Surrey where they found a unique cannabis-infused product, potato chips. I imagine it must have been the salt that they infused THC in, but who knows? It just goes to show that whether your legacy, illicit, legal, whatever, we're still inventive. Police say that their investigation in this case lasted 3 months, and along with those chips, they also seized MDMA, a pound of psychedelic mushrooms, and other things that you would generally expect. So lots of shatter, lots of bulk bud, 3.5 pounds of packaged cannabis, and it's still happening. There's another strange one too. In the Yukon territory, residents there purchased beef or bison jerky from a local business are being told not to eat it because it may contain THC. And that came because people had complained after eating this jerky that they were feeling things like nausea, numbness, difficulty walking, a high heart rate, and emergency doctors found traces of THC when people went to the hospital for treatment. So all of these off-the-hook Meatworks products are now off the shelves. So whether you want to get them or you don't want to get them, they're not there anymore. So here we are. Yeah, a couple of crimes to start off the year, and I'm sure lots more to happen. Those potato chips, though. What do you think of those?
Well, it's interesting. Both the THC jerky and the potato chips. I certainly don't advocate not telling somebody that there's THC in something. So the jerky is definitely over the line. The potato chips, I don't advocate the black market of the products there. But what it does is it's just. I didn't think about it. I don't know enough yet about food and cooking. I just had Chef Jordan Wagman on. I wish he was on this week so I could ask him that question. I don't know how it all works, but what I'm getting at is it's new ideas. We've seen the gummies, we've seen chocolate, we've seen drinks. now maybe cannabis companies, and if they're not already, and if there's anybody out there watching or listening that wants to chime in and let us know how this possibly might work, I'd love to hear that. So this just might open up new avenues, right? Like the more products we can successfully infuse cannabis with, the better, as long as it's on the legal market.
I feel like I'm going to the crime pages to get, like edible suggestions here.
Recipes.
So yeah, exactly. And, it's amazing the things that we see and the things that we will see. There's always something to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, no doubt. So that's an interesting one to watch. Some of the other products that were there, like you said, you would normally think would be in a bus, but the food, and then the other story with the jerky, concerning, people going to the hospital when they're not expecting it, but it certainly does give, people out there with some really good ideas. Now, this is a great idea, our next story that we're going to talk about, and this is something that I've done. I bet you I can count the amount of alcoholic drinks I had over the entire holiday. Well, I can on one hand. I had 3 glasses of wine and 2 beer. That's what I had. The rest was cannabis, and I'm, like a lot of people right now, choosing pot over booze.
Yeah, I had mimosas on Christmas, and that's sort of a holiday tradition in the family.
Okay, I had 6. You're right. I had that too.
It's a good way to get orange juice, I guess, and your champagne at the same time. We knew that weed was going to be a disruptor, and we're getting a glimpse at some of the extent. AJ Harrington, who writes a lot about weed, wrote on Forbes that over almost half of cannabis consumers who are 21 and older have replaced or reduced their alcohol consumption by using cannabis since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Those are the results of a Harris poll released at the end of 2020. This is of Americans, so take it all with a grain of salt, so to speak, because we don't necessarily know what the numbers are here in Canada. Going on trends, you imagine that they're pretty similar. That poll found that 1/3 of those who use cannabis recreationally just prefer it to drinking alcohol. But of the 2,000 Americans who were surveyed about their consumption habits since the beginning of COVID-19, basically 42% said that they'd either started or increased their cannabis consumption during the pandemic, while 45% said they'd replaced or reduced alcohol use with cannabis. And the survey was conducted on behalf of Curaleaf, so they're a manufacturer of and retailer of cannabis products that have operations in 23 states. So, where basically the survey was funded. Parents also, this was something that really resonated with me, is that parents are turning to cannabis at higher rates than those without children, according to the survey. And you take from that what you will. I personally think that cannabis is something that is just much more relaxing. And when I find myself, drinking 1 or 2 too many mimosas, that, I could become a little over the top sometimes, I gotta say. That said, when I'm enjoying a little bit of the old THC, I find myself much more likely to sit and play Lego with my son, or do chemistry products with my daughter. Like, I just love to be around and spend time with my kids, when I've got a little bit of a buzz on. That's, of course, not an advertisement for people to go out and overconsume or just get blitzed before they're parenting their kids. But there is something to say about the difference between the two.
Oh, well, and listen, there's just on the other side, when you say I'm going to go have a beer, it doesn't mean you're going to get blotto either, right? So you can have in moderation cannabis, just like people have alcohol in moderation, and I agree with you, and so many other people agree with you too. In that same story, there was another study that was conducted in California, and 2/3 of the respondents said that they plan to replace alcohol use with cannabis during the holiday season. 67% said the replacement of alcohol with cannabis would increase over 2019. So this is a trend that's going, in arrow up, as former Edmonton Oilers head coach Tom Rennie used to say. So it's a good trend, and it's a healthier trend. And by no means am I thinking alcohol is going to be gone and people are going to stop drinking, but you could just reduce your alcohol intake and save your liver a little bit by replacing that, whatever it is, with a cannabis product. So that's my sermon. I don't mean to crap on the alcohol industry, but for me, it's something that just doesn't always agree with me the way and I just don't feel good with it. So I've replaced it with cannabis.
And to each their own. And people who are using cannabis over alcohol are saying too that it reduces their stress and their anxiety, helps them relax, and it helps them to sleep. So, there are reasons why people use cannabis and reasons why people use alcohol. And, well, we're learning about both. And here we go. Yeah. Onward and upward.
Indeed. And that's what people, particularly lawmakers in New York, are looking at. And man, we've talked about this, right? As soon as we saw the other states sort of fall when it comes to prohibition and adding some sort of, whether it's medical or recreational legalization, all around New York, it was like they were surrounded by cannabis legalization in some way, and it was only a matter of time, and the ball is really starting to roll in that state right now.
I mean, they've got to be feeling the pressure. As predicted, New York just doesn't want to lose face to New Jersey. Legalized recreational cannabis during their referendum there during the U.S. election last fall. They're still working out the kinks, but that's to be expected. And New York lawmakers now are moving ahead with their own plans to reform the state's cannabis laws in 2021. They've pre-filed 8 bills so far, according to Marijuana Moment, that are going to be considered in the upcoming session. All these new measures deal with reforming the state's current medical cannabis system, but still they come along with that push from the governor there and legislators to legalize it in 2021. Now, those 7 cannabis bills have been preemptively introduced in the Assembly and so the 8th one there in the Senate, and they touch on a wide range of topics, everything from tenants' rights for medical cannabis patients to health insurance coverage for cannabis products. And all of these different pieces of legislation are being introduced as lawmakers in New York are pursuing their own recreational cannabis legalization legislation. And that's policy that's been in the works for the last couple of years. Their Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's a Democrat, recently said that enacting a regulated cannabis market and taxing products would offset economic losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's something else that we've talked about a lot over the last year, is that when it comes to prohibition, sometimes the changes come when you've seen real challenges in the economy, because it does open up new opportunities for taxation and new opportunities to offset those economic pressures that are being faced. And again, that's not only what we're seeing in New York, but we're starting to see in a lot of other states in the U.S. It's going to be a year or two of change across the border, and something that I'm really excited to see.
It's basically repeating history. After the Great Depression, what came back? Alcohol sales, and prohibition was lifted, and the taxation from it, and it's happening again, rightfully so, with cannabis. And we talk a lot about federal legalization. Is it going to get past the Republicans? But even the Republicans in New York are saying, yeah, this is going to happen. We're seeing everybody around us. So right now it's an empire of weed state of mind in New York, because there's no other way to go. It would just be foolish for them not to take these next steps. And I know Mr. Cuomo has been pushing hard for this, and it's sweeping the nation right now, and it will continue in 2021.
And I mean, let's not forget too that our number one story in 2020 that we talked about was that cannabis went from illegal to essential in such a short period of time in so many different places. And that says a lot when politicians are debating cannabis and whether or not it should be legal. A lot of them are looking at that.
Yeah. I've watched a lot of history shows, and I watched a lot of shows about alcohol prohibition, and back then there was a lot of resistance to that too, from a lot of religious groups and the teetotalers as they called them. But the similar push against cannabis It doesn't seem like it's there. Maybe just because we have so much more information, right? We just know so much more about this plant than we ever did. And I think a lot of people have maybe, looked at the economic benefits first of all, but then looked at the other benefits and some of the research and stuff said, yeah, like, I'm not selling my soul to the devil to legalize this, right? Like, there is some good benefits. So I think just that the overall tide on this has certainly changed. And, to dovetail on that story about New York, you have a state in Illinois that is, just shredding cannabis, records and charges when it comes to the legal system. And this is what happens when laws are changed. People get their lives, their freedom, and their livelihoods back because of silly charges over cannabis.
Yep, this is the way. We want to even the playing field. Let's not limit people who chose weed over booze in their youth and had the bad luck of getting busted. And you really hear we're talking about being equitable. And in that sense, Illinois has raced 500,000 low-level cannabis charges. And you mentioned earlier that we're not seeing as much push against cannabis as we maybe had during alcohol prohibition. I think that we're starting to see a significant push for cannabis. And a lot of that pressure is coming from the idea of social justice. And that's what's happening here. Right away in Canada, there was a lot of pressure to pardon people who had faced jail time, criminal records over even just minor possession charges. So, and that's what's happening here. The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has cleared the state's non-felony cannabis cases. So that's along with the 9,219 low-level cannabis convictions to start 2021. So the Democratic politician signed legislation 2019 legalizing recreational cannabis use in Illinois. So that started last year. And that allowed for almost 770,000 residents there to have their cannabis-related offenses expunged. And that's a record of criminal conviction that's destroyed or sealed from state or federal records. Now, he says, granted, in his words, we will never be able to fully remedy the depth of the damage in communities of color who have disproportionately shouldered this burden, but they can govern with the courage, as he says, to admit the mistakes of the past and the decency to set a better path forward. And both of those points are extremely important, to remedy the damage that was done and to have the decency to move forward in a better way. 2021, I really hope that that's what we're going to see. More of that, admitting that prohibition against cannabis was a mistake and fixing the consequences of that mistake, particularly when it comes to social justice.
Yeah, well, in life in general, when you can sit there and say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, it goes a lot farther than, it's not my fault, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not, blah, blah, blah. It just, culpability, when you just admit your mistake and you admit your fault, people have a tendency to see you in a better light. And that quote was so bang on. And I think they had until 2025 to get some of this stuff done. So they really, really got the ball rolling on this. And it's really encouraging to see. And I think that I hope a lot more people can just come to realize and say, hey, I made a mistake. My mind is now different. I've changed my mind. I realize that there's benefit and we can move forward, rather than just, acting like a 5-year-old that won't leave the White House or something like that, to reference a different kind of a story. But, I think there is, as you mentioned, just a more open-mindedness, because there is actual research. There is, whether, you could call it anecdotal, but there's actual medical research on the benefits of this plant. And 2020 was amazing for that election, and I just think that more and more is going to start opening up throughout the United States, as it has through here in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more than just words too. I like that Illinois created a program that's reinvesting 25% of their tax revenue from cannabis sales into a fund for youth development, anti-violence projects, economic development, and civil legal aid services, especially in areas that are dealing with high levels of gun violence, child poverty, and imprisonment. because that's what happens when you start a drug war. You end
Mm-hmm.
up with gun violence, poverty, and imprisonment.
Yeah, you're tearing
We have to make
families
that right.
apart, for sure. Great stuff, David. As usual, the first official segment of 2021, and here's to many, many more down the road. You can find the OZ at Okanagan Z, or at Okanagan Z on Twitter, and you can find them at okanaganz.com on the website. First episode with these this new mouth that I got for Christmas, David. You'll have to forgive me, but have a great 2021, and we'll talk soon.
Great to see you and talk to you.